for me anyway? What do I get out of this? Just so you know, it'll ruin your community. And I think that's the question that Solomon begins to ask. When God says to Solomon as a kid, hey, I'll give you anything you want, as a new king, I'll give you anything you want, Solomon's first reaction is not, well, what do I get? Because that's what God was saying. I'll give you anything. Solomon's first reaction was, well, what's in it for you, God? Like, give me a hearing heart. It wasn't about him. It was about God. Look what Solomon says next here. We had this beginning. He says, meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Verse 3, he says, what does a man gain from all his toil at which he toils under the sun? What's in it for me? What do I get? What does a man gain for all his toil at which he toils under the sun? And it's like, this is the question that Solomon is asking that comes right after meaningless, meaningless, everything's meaningless. And you're like, well, why would he switch from like everything is so important to everything's so meaningless? And his conclusion is, it's by asking this question, what do I get? What do I gain? It's interesting, if you look through Ecclesiastes, even though it does mention meaningless, meaningless so many times, probably more often than that, this theme of what do you get, what do I gain, comes up. In chapter 1, verse 3, what does a man gain from his labor? Chapter 2, 3, I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do and to gain. 2:10, and this was the reward for my labor, what I got. 2:11, nothing was gained under the sun. 2:15, what then do I gain by being wise? 2:22, what does a man gain for all his toil and anxious striving? 3:9, what does the worker gain for his toil? I mean, it goes on and on. 4:4, 4:8, 5:11, 5:15. The whole way through Ecclesiastes, this is one of those themes that we see that creates this darkness of like, what do I get? What's in it for me? What do I gain from all this toil? The word gain is like what's left over, like what do I end up with at the end? And he uses this idea of toil. It's not like good work. It's like the dark side of work. Like, what do I gain for all the work I'm doing, for everything I'm putting into this life? What do I get out of it? And we've all been there, right? Like, man, you're working, you're doing something, you're like, man, I am giving everything. I am toiling. What do I get in the end anyway? And he says, for all this work done under the sun, 29 times in Ecclesiastes, he's going to talk about what's done under the sun, like what you can see from your perspective with your eyes. You begin asking that question, and it changes everything. And we're going to see that here in Solomon's life. As Solomon goes through this section of Ecclesiastes and he walks into these dilemmas, we're going to see how that question distorts the things he's looking at. And as you ask that question, what's in it for me, and you look at your life through that lens, which to be honest is the lens of the Western world. What do I get? What's in it for me? It will twist everything. I remember visiting my brother, Ben. You're going to meet him, actually. He's coming to teach in a few weeks. But I was visiting him in Portland. And we went to a place called Burnside Skate Park. Have you guys ever been there? And I think isn't there somebody from Portland in here? Maybe it was Portland, yes. There's a place called Burnside Skate Park, and my brother took me there, and he likes to skate, or used to like to skate, and we went there, and he's like, a super fun place to come, and but he's like, I only go early in the morning, because it's one of these places, probably like some surfing places, where if you're there when there's other guys there, you don't want to get in their way. Like, people get super upset. And we're there, and we're kind of hanging out and just watching some of these guys, and they were amazing skaters. I mean, just like flying off things, and it was awesome, the tricks they were doing. And my brother was explaining to me a story. He says, a little while ago at this point, he's like, there was a guy who was here, and he was kind of one of the locals, one of the guys who was always skating Burnside, and he was here, and he was just doing such an amazing job as he was skating around, and just like nailing tricks that he'd never nailed before. And he was just on this day. Like, everything he tried, he was nailing it. And everybody, guys are around like slamming their boards on the deck of the half pipe and stuff as he's popping from like feature to feature in this concrete park, and just like amazing session, just nailing everything. And again, guys, everybody's freaking out, and all of a sudden he comes up and there's this one really high drop. It's like 15, 20-foot concrete drop. And he goes, he pulls off a trick, gets on top, runs to the top of the drop, and everybody's like ready. He's going to drop into this thing and do something crazy. And because he's having this like amazing skate session, and he gets up there and he's getting ready to drop in, and he throws his skateboard and he dives headfirst off into the concrete. And everybody's just like, what in the world? They ended up getting him together, and they got the ambulance in there, brought him to the hospital. He actually didn't die. And they said, eventually when he came out of whatever he was in, they said, what were you doing? Like that was amazing, your skate session. You were like on top of your game. Like, what were you thinking? And his answer was, I knew life couldn't get any better than that. I knew that was going to be the best skate session I've ever had. And he's like, I'd rather end on top. And it was like this twisted mentality that said, if this is as good as it gets, I know things are going to go downhill. I've got everything I want right now. I better end it while I have it. And I don't know what ended up happening to him, but I think it was dark. It's like, man, that question, like, what's in it for me? What do I gain? When that becomes the central question in your life, it throws everything else off. We're going to walk into these 4 dilemmas for Solomon and see where he goes with them. And so we're a little bit behind, but we'll start with a song for this class. And so again, I'm going to play this song. We'll come to that verse a little bit later, but I'm going to play this song, and I want you guys to think about, again, same thing, like what does the artist want you to think, feel, experience as you hear this song? And then think about the words, and I'll actually have the words up there. This is a well-known hymn, and so you'll know this song, but I want us to think through, again, what does the artist want us to think, feel, experience through the words or through the song itself? Okay. Obviously a song you guys have heard before. Give me some thoughts. First thoughts, what do you think about, what does the artist want you to feel when she sung that, they did that song? Obviously she wasn't the one who wrote it. Yeah.
Whatever like key they did it in isn't very minor, so it's like very like light and airy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily happy, but kind of like hopeful.
Yeah.
Especially with the words.
Yep.
So like in contrast to the earlier song, it's like just feels like the opposite. It's hopeful. It's like light.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, definitely like this light, airy. I think of like a sunrise. Like that in my mind, it's like a sunrise. Yeah. Other thoughts? What the sound of it, instrumentation? Yep.
I feel like maybe the lyrics and stuff like that. It's like when you listen to it, you get like closeness with God.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a feeling of closeness, looking towards God. Yep.
I was just like when it talks about creation and how great God is and that He spared His Son,
Yeah.
just like how sovereign He is and that He has total control of it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think about His like awesomeness.
Yeah, totally. How great he is, right? Like the whole way through, you think about how awesome God is. Like that's the idea. Yeah.
It's really reflective and like grateful.
Yeah.
Just then look back at all the things God does and you see God.
Yep. Reflective, grateful. I love, he kind of goes from like one of the verses is like this big stuff, like his mountains and like, and then he kind of comes down to like the gentle brook and the birds and it's kind of like God is great from like the great giant things he does all the way down to these little tiny details of life. Like he's in charge. And I like you brought up, he even brings in, the artist brings in, the author, and she sings about it, the aspect of Christ at the end there. It's interesting because when we look at nature, it's often one of the first places people go to think about God. And when you're looking at life and trying to evaluate and understand life, it's a natural place to go first, and it's going to be where Solomon goes first. I live in a mountain town. Where I live, there are very few believers. I mean, we have some. I think we were asking my kids the other day, like, how many other Christians do you have in your class at school? Like 100 kids. And it's like 2. Like most of our friends who live in town are not Christians, and yet they all love nature. And they all appreciate nature. And so it makes sense that Solomon is going to start here. This is one of the things he says here at the beginning in Ecclesiastes 4. He says, "The sun rises and the sun sets, and it hurries back to where it rises again. The wind blows to the north and blows south to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning to its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, there they return." Again, I love that we're starting with nature here in Kauai, because it is got to be I was telling Sarah the other day, I think this is probably one of the most beautiful places in the world. I mean, honestly, and I don't know if any of you guys have been somewhere where you'd say, no, it's more beautiful. And obviously beauty is different depending on, but I'm like, Kauai is incredible. Like it really is. And I love that the things that Solomon mentions here actually are essential to life here in Kauai. He talks about the sun and how it moves around. As he says, it rises and sets and hurries back to where it rises. Can you imagine if that didn't happen consistently? Like we would be in serious trouble if the sun didn't come up. And the way that God designed the earth is so perfect that it kind of goes around, it rises and sets at just the right time to make it a perfectly habitable place. The moon, which has a slower kind of rotation, it has its daytime temp, and I can't remember, I think its days are 2 weeks long and its nights are 2 weeks long. The daytime temp on the moon gets up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. The nighttime temp on the moon gets to negative 208. Because it's away from the sun for that long or facing the sun for that long. And so you start to think about it and you're like, wow, this is kind of crazy that this planet we live on so perfectly rotates. I mean, he kind of seems to think back then that the sun kind of moved around the earth, but we all know it's actually earth that's rotating around the sun on an axis, and as the seasons go around. And it's one of the cool things with Kauai is it's because we're at the equator, you hardly have a difference in season. I think it's a little bit warmer when you first got here. Was it hotter than now? But it's not, was it so hot? So I've only been here at this time of year, but it sounds like compared to other places, Colorado, we're usually negatives, Fahrenheit this time of year. In the mornings for sure, sometimes all day. Some of you guys are from cold places. Summers are awesome, like 80 degrees. Sometimes we get up to 90, but Kauai is like consistent. And I love this. He recognizes this picture, like this is beautiful. This is essential to life. He also talks about the wind. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes. And I don't know if you've ever thought about how important wind is for our planet. And again, you guys live somewhere here in Kauai where wind is really normal and the movement of wind. And what happens, it happens in microcosms, but it also happens on like a global scale where you've got warm air around the equator where the sun's been hitting and that warm air rises, which then creates a vacuum underneath it and sucks air, from the two poles up. And so that warm air goes high, where it begins to cool down. It creates a vacuum and sucks cool air down towards the equator. And then that current then takes that hot air up to the Arctic or the Antarctic, either side, and it cools it off so it drops down and can come again. And you have these kind of global wind currents and air currents that happens in small ways too, where you have smaller cycles that take place. If that didn't happen, we would die from this like air that just stays in one place. And though it's almost like we've got this air conditioning unit in our globe that just keeps moving fresh air around and changes the temperature, brings hot air up, cold air in. I mean, it's actually incredible. And Solomon's recognizing this, thousands and thousands of years ago. He also mentions the water system. This idea that all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, there they return again. And again, you read this, you're like, man, is Solomon in Kauai? I mean, I honestly, and I know, there's natural springs and all this stuff, but I walk around Kauai and I'm like, this is like a small island. How are there this many streams? Like freshwater streams flowing down. You're like, when is it going to just like run out? And I don't know how that works. I mean, you guys know. Obviously, there's like, you're like, I know. There's like springs underneath, like aqueducts underground.
Hawaii is actually the wettest place on Earth.
Is it?
It's in a consistent cloud year-round.
And so that's part of it is the rain itself falling on it. And so where does that water come from, the rain? Well, most of it comes probably from the ocean or from the heat on the ground as it's going down. And so there's this, again, it's God's incredible creation that we don't run out of water. Now, certain places can run out of water, but water is just moved. It keeps moving around. In a place like Kauai, it keeps kind of dumping back onto itself as it evaporates out of the ocean, comes through, falls on the tops of the peaks, comes down. It really is a beautiful picture of what happens. But you're like, that doesn't seem like Solomon would be talking about how beautiful it is. He was just saying meaningless, everything's meaningless. Well, let's look how Solomon interprets these things that are essential to life. Here, we'll come back to this. I want to do this, but we'll do it after this. He says this, the sun rises, the sun sets, hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning up to its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. The place where the streams come from, there they return again. Again, three beautiful pictures of creation. He says, all things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, there's something new? It's already been done long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of people of old, and those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. What is Solomon doing in this? This is kind of his poem that he starts with, this poem about creation, about the sun cycle and the wind and the water system. How does he interpret that through the darkness of his mind? What's kind of his conclusion? Why even bring up? Yeah.
Well, if I'm sort of getting your question right, then he's like, wait.
Yeah. Like so. Based on what he says here, why does he even bring up? What is he using nature as a kind of an illustration of, or why does he bring up nature?
He's sort of like, then he's kind of like, there's nothing new here. Like, everybody gets, like, you can't be satisfied by it. It always is happening. There's nothing new. Like, we can't be satisfied with our eyes, and our, like, we're not satisfied with what we hear. It's all just weary, and we can't change anything.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
And the connection to nature is, you were saying it, like why connect that to nature, to what we were saying with those three things? Yeah, like each of those, which is what makes them so great, right? Like the thing that makes all three of those so amazing and so essential is the fact that they happen over and over again. Like we have to have the sun coming up every day. If it decided, like, you know what, today I'm not going to come up, like we'd be screwed. It'd be over. If the winds didn't keep cycling, we would end up suffocating from this air that just sits and stagnates. If the water didn't keep that system of evaporating and going and the streams bringing it down, we wouldn't have enough water. The oceans would fill. And it's like that's the beauty of it. But Solomon has this mindset where he's looking at life and the darkness of myself. And he's like, you know what? The cycle of the sun, the cycle of the wind, the cycle of the water, it's just like life. It just goes on and on and on and on. Nothing changes. Nobody will be remembered. I'm going to live. I'm going to think my life's important. I'm going to work really hard. And then at some point, I'm going to get old, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to be forgotten. And somebody else will be born. And they're going to grow up, and they're going to think they're important. And then they're going to get old, and then they're going to die, and then they're going to be forgotten. And then somebody else is going to be born. And he's like, this is the like annoyance of life as you think it's so good, and in the end, you actually don't change anything. Life just keeps happening like a circle over and over again. And it's like, what, Solomon? You took something so beautiful, and you used it to show how dark life is, or to it's like, why would you come to that conclusion? And again, it's like this, if the idea is all about me, what do I get? What do I gain? How can I have significance in this world? How can I change the world for me? His conclusion at the end of his life is, you can't change anything, and you won't be remembered. Everybody will be forgotten. I don't know how many of you guys know your great-great-grandfather, you know, or great-great-great, you know, you may know. At some point, you're going to be like, yeah, I have no idea who they were. You know, some of you guys are like really good with family trees. Like, I don't know. I know my grandfather. I know the name of my great-great-grandmother, but I actually don't know the name of my great-great-grandfather on my dad's side. I have no idea who my great-great-great-grandfather is. No clue. I think he probably thought he was important. But I'm in his family and I don't even know him. And Solomon's like, what a discouraging, disappointing, like meaningless life we live in, that nobody remembers you. You just live, you think you're important, and you die and nothing changes. Life goes on, the world keeps spinning. It's meaningless. He's saying it's like Hevel. You can't hold onto it. You can't take a grip on it. I want to really quickly, because of where you guys are here, just look a little bit at this idea of creation, because I think it is one of those keys into understanding God and into understanding life and living somewhere that's so beautiful. I know how easy it is to not take advantage of how the beauty of life is actually meant to encourage us. Not like Solomon discourage us, it's actually meant to encourage us. It's interesting because here in Kauai, tons of people come here, right? Like tourists from all over the world come to Kauai. You guys are living here, so you see them kind of coming in. And people from all different belief systems. When an atheist comes to Kauai and they go out and they see the sunset over the palm trees, and you know, it's like, oh man, it's so beautiful, and the colors and the water and the smells and the sounds, they enjoy it just like you. Like, that's not something that only Christians get to do, right? Like, everybody does. And so atheists, I've got a bunch of friends, like Hawaii is a huge destination for people from our town in Colorado. Like, it seems like everybody goes to Hawaii at some point during the year. and they come to places like Kauai, and they're like, man, it's awesome. No interest in Jesus, no interest in the Bible, but they say the same things I do. It was beautiful. It was amazing. Like, wow, it was awesome. Do they really get to enjoy it? Yes, they do. Like, they really do enjoy it. And people who come as tourists that you see, they really do, in a sense, enjoy it. They actually get a chance to worship. They worship. They don't know who they're worshiping. They don't know what they're worshiping. But they do get to see and enjoy creation. But it stops at themselves, right? It doesn't go past what they can see. They could take a selfie, with it in the background, and it kind of is like now they're kind of worshiping themselves because look where I was. But it stops there. The atheist looks at creation, and that's kind of the extent of their worship, which is still good. Like, it's still beautiful. But it's interesting, the theist, somebody who believes in God, whether you believe in one God, many gods, I think of even those who, Hawaii's got a long history with all sorts of belief systems. And so you've got the theist who comes with a belief in God. They've seen the same creation, the same palm trees, the same sunset, and they can look at it and say, wow, that is beautiful. That's incredible. Just like the atheist can. Both of them can look at it and say, that's awesome. We're in agreement on that. But the theist can go farther than just seeing creation. The theist sees creation, says that's beautiful, but it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with like, hey, look at me, I'm there, and that's kind of it. They actually can turn and say, I actually believe there's a God who made it. Or that there's a spiritual being who's behind that stuff. And so the theist has an extra place of worship that the atheist can never go to. The atheist can look at it and say it's beautiful. That's great. That's beautiful. It's awesome. It's good that the atheist can say that. But it falls so far short of what the theist can do. The theist, the person who believes in a God, can say, look at it, it's beautiful, but I actually know there is a God or gods or spiritual beings behind that must be even greater to have made it. And so their worship as a theist, as a believer in God or gods, is bigger. But I don't know how much you think about this. The Christian has a totally different perspective, an even greater degree of worship. When the Christian looks at the same sunset, so here you are, you're next to an atheist, you're next to a theist who doesn't believe in Jesus, and you're a Christian, you guys look at the same sunset, and you all say the same thing. That's beautiful. That's amazing. We all agree that's incredible. Me with my friends in town, non-believers, they don't believe in any God, we all say the same thing, man, Kauai is incredible. I've got another friend who, I don't know what belief system he is, but he built a temple somewhere, not in Kauai, but on another Hawaiian island. He believes in some spiritual beings. And he would say, with me, in a different way than my other friends who don't believe in God at all, he would say, wow, Hawaii is beautiful, and there's a spiritual realm behind it. Now, he's all into plants and all this stuff and the spiritual energy force that's in everything. But it goes beyond just the worship of the beauty of it. He goes on to believing there's a God behind it as a theist. But a Christian, this is incredible. A Christian can look at creation with the theist, say, hey, there's something beautiful behind it. But the Christian also recognizes that powerful God, that thing behind it, actually came and died for me. Like, actually came and suffered on the cross for me. And like all of a sudden there's this value placed. When you look at the beauty and you say it's amazing and you believe there's a God behind it that must be even bigger, and then you recognize that God behind it that must be bigger actually loved me and gave himself for me. And then you understand as you read Scripture that not only did he love me and die for me, but he actually gave his life to live in me through his Spirit. Whoa. You're like, let me see some more. Like that's and again, I live in a beautiful place. It's gorgeous, mountains and awesome scenery. But I wake up in the morning and sometimes I can just like kind of be flippantly like, oh yeah, beautiful sunrise this morning over the mountains. instead of saying, like, God, let me soak that in, because when I look at the beauty of those mountains and I see how powerful you are as God, it can remind me that that is the same God that died for me, and that's actually the God that lives in me, and it makes me want to worship you even more. You see, I think sometimes we satisfy ourselves with just living like an atheist. We know we're believers, we know we're theists, and we know we believe in Jesus, but we just enjoy life like an atheist, which is enjoyable, but it stops at that thing. And man, to learn to say, God, I want to move beyond just the item to the God behind the item, and to recognize that the God behind the item gave himself to me. I actually think that's what the author of How Great Thou Art was trying to do in that song. Because remember, he talks about all these things that were created, the big things, the mountains and all that, and then all the way down to the woods and the glades and the birds. And then he goes to this, the last chorus is, when I think that God, his son not sparing, sent him to die, I scarce can take it in, that on the cross my burden gladly bearing, he bled and died to take away my sin. I think the whole point of the song is to say, you want to see how great God is? Enjoy his creation, but don't let it stop there. Remember that as you enjoy the creation of God, it points you to the love of God, to the person of Jesus. Again, Solomon, that's not where he was. Solomon wasn't there. At the heart of Solomon's life was this question, what do I gain? What's in it for me? What does a man get? And because that's at the center of his life, it just destroys everything. When I think of that first dilemma, the hevel, the meaninglessness, the inability to hold on to. I'm going to keep writing hevel there because we don't have a word for it. It's like you think you have it and it's gone. He's like, the significance and impact of life is like hevel. You can't grab it. You can't hold on to it. Again, I think Solomon's writing to younger people. And you guys are at a time in your life where really so much of life is exciting. Man, I want to change the world. I'm going to do big things. Here I am in my 40s, 45. And it's easy to start looking back at my life and saying, man, did I actually even do anything? Did I change anybody? I can have great experiences with students that come to Timberline and wow, they seem to really come to Jesus and they change. They're like, my life has changed. I'm going to be a totally different person. And then 2 or 3 years later, I find out they're addicted to the same drugs. Same problems. And I was like, man, I thought there was change. And if the focus is on me and whether I make a difference, Solomon's conclusion is, it leaves us feeling empty. It leaves us saying, meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Let's hit the next one real quick where he goes from there. He goes into the next verse, verse 12. He says, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that's done under heaven. If you read that, the first kind of dilemma he hits is, can you change the world? Are you significant? Are you a world changer? And his answer as an old man is nope, you don't change anything. The world just goes on and on and on, and you won't be remembered. And so he's hit that kind of like that dark place, and he's going to say, well, let me try another one. What's another? Where do you think he goes? From maybe leadership significance. When you read that, I became teacher, I devoted myself to study, explore wisdom, all that's done under heaven. What do you think his next thing he's kind of going for might be? From significance and change, where do you think from this might be his next endeavor that people spend a lot of their lives focusing on? Okay, personal glory. I think a lot of people get personal glory out of this. When you read that passage, what he's kind of shifted to a different aspect of life. From nature and significance, yeah. like knowledge, learning, study, understanding. And it's one of those things that we often do when you realize you can't change something. When something is too solid, too hard to change, or too big for you to change, a lot of times what we do is we're like, well, I just want to understand it. Like I can't change it, so let me at least understand it so much that I feel like I own it in a different way. I don't know if you guys remember or have ever seen the movie The Grizzly Man, I think it's called. Have you guys seen that? It's about a guy who goes up to Alaska and he lives with grizzly bears. I think it's like Treadwell, I can't remember his first name, Timothy Treadwell maybe. And he's with these grizzly bears, which are huge, right? Like he can't control these animals. They're massive. But he goes up like every single summer and he gets to know them, and he gives them names, and he says they're his friends, and he's kind of an odd guy. And it's like he can't control them, he can't make them do things, he can't change them, but it's almost like he's gotten to know them so well that he feels like he owns them. He talks about them as like his family and his, the movie ends up with him taking his girlfriend up there to introduce her, and maybe she'd been up a couple times, I can't remember, to meet all of his friends. And it's kind of a sad movie because one of these bears decided, I don't want to belong to that guy. And it killed them both, ate them. And it's like, oh my goodness. This like kind of idea that if I know it well enough, I own it. If I can grasp it with my mind, I have control over it. And Solomon's going to say, you know what? It's the same thing. It also leaves you empty. He says, what a heavy burden God has laid on men. This idea, this illusion of owning things. I've seen all the things that were done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. He's like, I tried to understand it all, to study the world, thinking maybe that's where purpose comes from. That's where I'm going to find I can't change the world, right? That was the first part. The world just goes on. Sun keeps coming up. Everything's going to happen. I'm going to be forgotten. But maybe at least in my life, I can step outside of the world and observe it like a master scientist. And I'm going to study the world. But like a storm chaser who could tell you everything about tornadoes and how they work, he can't stop the tornado from running his car off the road or from pulling him up in the air. He's like, I look at this, I looked from above, I tried to understand it all, and he said, in the end, what I see is that men are like ants. He doesn't use the word ants, but it's got this idea of they keep running around. It's like this burden that God lays on men. I see all the things that are done under the sun, and it's just meaningless. It's like chasing after the wind when I look at people. What's twisted cannot be straightened. What's lacking cannot be counted. He's like, when I look down at people, I'm like, man, humanity is a messed up group of people. Just chasing their tail all the time. And then he goes to verse 16, 17, and he said, actually, it's a lot more personal than that. It's not just them, it's me. Verse 16, he says, I thought to myself, look, I've grown and I've increased in wisdom more than anyone who's ruled in Jerusalem before me. I've become the wisest person. I've experienced much in wisdom and knowledge. So I applied myself to understanding of wisdom and also to madness and folly, but I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. He's like, it's not only that when I look at creation and I've been studying mankind and like a psychologist or a philosopher, and I said, man, people are just running around, poor them. He actually says, actually, poor me. Because even my journey of studying and trying to understand has left me empty. It's like trying to chase after the wind. And he says it's even worse than that. Verse 18, he says, this is what my search for wisdom did. What's my conclusion? With much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Basically, he said, I spent my whole life trying to understand the world, and the more I understood, the more pain I had in my life. The more I felt like I grasped what was happening, the more I understood things, the more it hurt. And it is true, isn't it? The more you learn, the more pain there is in life. I had this example, and this is kind of an extreme example, but when I was growing up, we had a Taco Bell in my town. And I love Taco Bell. Anybody have a Taco? It's kind of embarrassing for some people. Anybody Taco Bell fans in here? There's got to be at least one. Yes, thank you. I love Taco Bell. It's like cheap, and it has a lot of flavor, and I have no idea what grade of meat it is in there, but I loved Taco Bell. And we would go to this Taco Bell every week. We'd eat at this Taco Bell. And one year, we were eating at the Taco Bell, and one time we go up to the Taco Bell, and we saw that on the front of the door was a big sign that says closed. Taco Bell closed until further notice. And what? What's going on? And it was like a weird sign. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we're out for the afternoon. It was like big old like closed sign. And we'd been eating there, and it was like, bummer. Went the next day, still closed. Well, an article came out in the newspaper. And in this article, it explained what happened at the Taco Bell. A guy had come in, and he'd ordered a burrito. And so he went up to the counter, asked for his burrito. This Taco Bell ended up being the kind of place where all the seniors in high school worked. It kind of got that reputation of it's a cool place to work. All the seniors worked there. A lot of it was the druggies. They loved working at Taco Bell. I don't know why. It was just the place where they'd work. And so this guy comes in. He orders a burrito. The guys in the back, they're just hanging out, whatever, seniors in high school. And they're like, okay, make the burrito. As they're making the burrito, the guy notices, it's like an open kitchen, he notices that one of the guys cuts his hand while he's making the burrito. And his hand starts bleeding, and he wipes it on the burrito and keeps making the burrito. Folds it up, wraps it up, hands it to the guy on the counter, and the guy's like, I'm not going to eat that. The guy's like, no, that's fine. I can make you another one. You'll buy another one. And the guy's like, no, you look at your hand. You cut your hand. I think some of that blood got on my burrito. Like, make me another burrito. And the guy's like, no, you make yourself another burrito, or whatever he said. And the guy was smart. This guy, he's like, okay, I'll take the burrito. So he bought the burrito, took it home, froze it, and sent it to Taco Bell headquarters. I don't even know where that is. And at Taco Bell headquarters, they looked into it. They did like a test, and sure enough, there was human blood on the burrito, the story. So they set up cameras in this Taco Bell. Now again, this is the Taco Bell that I went to, like, not quite every day, but all the time. They found these guys picking their nose and flicking it in the beans, spitting, peeing, like all the grossest stuff you could imagine in the food. And it was their big inside joke that everybody in town was eating their Taco Bell and eating their piss and eating their boogers. And when I read this in the newspaper, oh my goodness, I was like, ah! Because you see, if I didn't know that, I'd be fine, right? If I didn't know that, I wasn't feeling sick. But with wisdom comes sorrow. With knowledge comes grief. Now, of course, that's an extreme story, right? But it's true in life. If you've ever been on a missions trip, like somewhere where there's more poverty, you go there, and maybe you're excited to go on this missions trip, but you spend enough time with people in poverty, and you come back to the wealth of your own country, and there's like a pain there. There's a sorrow. Like, I don't know if I can live the same. I remember my cousin went and lived in Sudan for like 2 months, and she worked with impoverished kids in a refugee camp. And as she was there, it was like life-changing for her. And she came back to the United States, and she was going to stop in Florida to just kind of debrief and have some quiet time. And the family was just, I don't know what they were thinking, but they thought, oh, this would be great for my cousin Heather to take her to Disneyland or Disney World, whichever one is, I think it's Disneyland in Florida, Disney World. And so it was like within days of getting back, they took her to Disney World, and it almost killed my cousin. Because the pain. Because she had seen that world, and now she couldn't be the same. It's the same coming to Anchor House. You guys are learning things in the Word. There's things that the Lord's doing in your hearts. When you go home, you can't be the same. You either will change because you know things you didn't know before, and the Lord has worked in your heart, and you'll be a different person, and it comes with pain and struggle, but also joys, or you'll say, you know what, I'm going to go back to the person I was before, but it comes with a deeper pain because you know you're ignoring things. You see, with wisdom, it does come with sorrow. There is an understanding. And as Solomon's looking at it, he's like, man, I can't change the world, but maybe I can understand it. He's like, the more I understood, the more I tried to grasp, the more I saw the pain in the world in front of me. And I'm like, this is a waste of my time. If life's about what do I get, what do I gain, and everything I study just shows me the brokenness of this world and the hurt of this world, that's a waste of my time. It's meaningless. It just leaves me sorrowful and in grief. Why waste my time in education? I think it's so interesting because when I think about that, I think about God. What is he? He says he's omniscient, all-knowing. It's sometimes really easy for us to point the finger at God and say, God, I can't believe you could let this happen. But if with wisdom and knowledge comes pain and grief and sorrow, I don't think we have any idea the kind of pain and grief and sorrow that God has. For him to know deeply every single thing that's going on in this world. Can you imagine that? I think of it, we have a God who is as far away from what do I gain as could be. Because a God who says, what do I gain, would say, you know what, I'm going to forget about this world. Because I don't want to even know what's happening there. But no, we have a God who says, I love this world. I'm going to engage this world. I know this world. I'm going to give my son to this world. Of course, Solomon's not there. First and second dilemma he goes through. First one, you can't change the world. It's changing the world's significance is like Hevel. It's meaningless. Second one, you can try to understand the world. You can have intellectual pursuits. You can try to be wise and the smartest person in the world. He's like, go for it. It's just going to leave you in pain and in sorrow. It's also Hevel. You think you've got it, and it's gone. You might ask, we'll finish with this verse. You might ask, well, where was the wisdom that Solomon got from God? I thought he was made the wisest man in the world. And I love this verse in James because I think it could be that it's pointing us towards Solomon and this change that takes place. It says, James 3:13, who is wise and understanding among you? I'm like, well, Solomon is. Solomon was wise and understanding. He says, let them show it by their good life, by the deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. That wasn't Solomon, not at the end of his life. But if you harbor bitter envy, selfish ambition in your hearts, what is bitter envy and selfish ambition? What can I get? What do I gain? What's in it for me? If that's what's at the heart of your life, do not boast about it or deny the truth. That kind of wisdom does not come from heaven, but it's earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder in every evil practice. So I look at Solomon and I'm like, how could Solomon have gotten to this dark place? It wasn't that God's wisdom fell through for him. It wasn't that God's wisdom led him to brokenness. It sounds like, according to James, that he had allowed a worldly wisdom to come in. A wisdom that was driven by selfish ambition. What can I get? Bitter envy. Looking at what others had, and I want it for myself. And he said, that kind of wisdom destroys you. Again, as we begin this journey with Solomon, we have to take a deep check. I have to take a deep check in my own heart. Because I know I live in a world, and I know I am a person who is very self-obsessed. What do I get? What do I gain? What's in it for me? And Solomon, as an old man, says, be careful if that's the question you're asking. It's going to ruin you. It's going to ruin your thinking about significance. It's going to ruin your pursuits for education. And then he's going to go from there. Let's take another break. And we're kind of getting a little bit behind. That's okay. I think we can finish the next section. It's 11:05. Let me give you your 15 because it sounds like 10 was a little short to get up and back, right? So 11:20. And then we'll have we'll do a kind of a shorter class at the end to get done for lunch. So 11:20, back down. We'll look at his last two dilemmas.